The air conditioning hummed quietly in the background as Andre Taylor walked into Lecture Hall B for his first advanced calculus class at Westfield University. The enormous room, with its stadium-style seating, was already filling up with students who chatted among themselves or stared at their phones. Andre adjusted his backpack strap and took a deep breath. New school, new start. He had graduated top of his class from a public high school across town, but here at Westfield nobody knew him. Nobody knew about the math competitions he'd won, or the hours he'd spent solving problems just for fun. Here, he was just another freshman trying to find his place. Andre spotted an empty seat in the front row. Most students avoided the front, preferring to hide in the anonymous safety of the middle or back rows. But Andre wanted to see everything clearly. He slid into the seat and pulled out his notebook, calculator, and 2 freshly sharpened pencils, arranging them neatly on the small desk attached to his chair. "You sure you want to sit there?" Andre looked up to see a guy with curly brown hair and friendly eyes standing in the aisle. "Front row in Harrington's class is like volunteering for the firing squad," the guy continued, lowering his voice. "I'm David, by the way. Andre, and yeah, I like being able to see the board." David shrugged. "Your funeral, man. Just giving you the heads up. Harrington's got a reputation." Before Andre could ask what kind of reputation, the lecture hall door swung open, and the room instantly quieted. Professor Richard Harrington walked in with the confident stride of someone who knew exactly how important he was. He was tall and lean, with silver hair at his temples and a precisely trimmed beard. His clothes looked expensive but understated. A dark gray button-up shirt, no tie, and pressed slacks. He didn't smile as he placed his leather briefcase on the desk. "Advanced Calculus 301. He announced without introduction, his voice carrying effortlessly through the large room. "If you're looking for basic calculus or introduction to statistics, you're in the wrong place. This course will challenge you. Some of you will not make it to the end of the semester." His eyes swept across the room, pausing briefly when they landed on Andre. Something flickered across the professor's face. Surprise, perhaps, or something else Andre couldn't quite name. Andre straightened in his seat, maintaining eye contact until the professor looked away. "I do not grade on a curve," Harrington continued. "I do not offer extra credit. I do not accept late assignments. If this doesn't work for you, the drop period ends next Friday." He turned to the whiteboard and began writing a series of complex equations without further preamble. Andre opened his notebook and started taking notes, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The equations were familiar friends to him. He'd covered most of this material on his own 2 years ago. 30 minutes into the lecture, Harrington posed a question to the class. "Who can tell me the practical application of this formula in engineering?" The room fell silent. A few students looked down at their notes in panic. Others simply avoided eye contact with the professor. Andre knew the answer, but hesitated to speak up on the first day. "No one?" Harrington said, his disappointment evident. "I see." He turned back to the board, then suddenly pivoted. "You," he said, pointing directly at Andre. "What's your name?" "Andre Taylor, sir." "Mr. Taylor, perhaps you'd like to take a guess? Or did you choose the front row just to have a better view of your inevitable failure?" A few nervous laughs echoed through the room. Andre felt heat rising in his face, not from embarrassment, but from the unfairness of being singled out this way. He took a deep breath. "The formula shows how we can calculate stress distribution in load-bearing structures," Andre said evenly. "It's particularly important in bridge design and tall buildings to prevent catastrophic failures during earthquakes or high winds." Harrington's eyebrows rose slightly. "Correct," he said after a pause that stretched just a bit too long. "Though I wonder if you simply memorized that from a textbook." "Actually," Andre replied before he could stop himself, "you could also apply a variation of it to fluid dynamics problems, especially in aerospace engineering when calculating pressure distributions across wing surfaces." The room went completely still. Professor Harrington stared at Andre for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he cleared his throat. "Yes, well, that's getting ahead of the syllabus," he said dismissively. "We'll cover applications in aerospace in week 8. He turned back to the board and continued the lecture at a noticeably faster pace, introducing increasingly complex concepts with minimal explanation. Andre kept up easily, his pencil moving quickly across the page, but he noticed several confused expressions on the faces of students around him. After class, as Andre was packing up his things, David appeared beside him again. "Dude," he said, eyes wide. "What was that?" Andre shrugged. "Just answered his question." "Yeah, but nobody answers Harrington's questions correctly on the first day. And nobody certainly doesn't add extra information that makes him look like he left something out." "I didn't mean to make him look bad," Andre said, zipping his backpack closed. "I just knew the answer." "Well, you've definitely got his attention now," David said, glancing toward the front of the room where Harrington was watching them while pretending to organize his papers. "Not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Guess I'll find out," Andre replied. Outside the lecture hall, the September sunshine felt warm and welcome after the air-conditioned chill. Students streamed along the paths crisscrossing the historic campus, with its mix of ivy-covered brick buildings and modern glass structures. Andre checked his schedule on his phone. "Where are you headed next?" David asked, falling into step beside him. "Library. I've got a 2-hour break before my next class." "Perfect. Cafeteria's right next to it, and I'm starving. I'll show you where everything is." As they walked, David filled Andre in on campus life and Professor Harrington's notorious reputation. Apparently, the calculus professor took pride in having one of the highest failure rates in the university. He'd been teaching at Westfield for nearly 20 years and had tenure, which meant he could pretty much do whatever he wanted. "Last year," David said as they approached the library's massive stone steps, "this girl started crying in the middle of his midterm exam. Just broke down completely. Harrington just stood there and watched. Didn't even offer her a tissue." "How do you know all this if you're in the same year as me?" Andre asked. "My sister had him 3 years ago. She warned me what to expect. Said the only way to survive is to keep your head down and never stand out." David gave Andre a pointed look, which you've already failed at, by the way. "I'm not going to pretend not to know things just to make a professor feel better about himself," Andre said. "Noble, but possibly suicidal in Harrington's class," David replied with a laugh. "Anyway, cafeteria's through there. Library's main entrance is up those steps. Want to meet up after your next class? A bunch of us are getting together to form a study group." "Yeah, that sounds good," Andre said, surprised at how easily he'd made a potential friend. Maybe Westfield wouldn't be so intimidating after all. In the library, Andre found a quiet corner and set up his laptop. He'd planned to review the syllabus for his other classes, but instead found himself thinking about Professor Harrington and the strange look he'd given Andre at the beginning of class. Andre was used to being underestimated. He'd dealt with it throughout high school, teachers expressing surprise at his aptitude for math and science, classmates making assumptions about his interests and abilities. Usually people adjusted their expectations once they saw what he could do. But something told him Professor Harrington might be different. He pulled out his phone and typed, "Professor Richard Harrington, Westfield University," into the search bar. Several academic papers appeared, along with the professor's university profile and a few news articles about mathematical research. Andre clicked on the profile first. The formal photograph showed Harrington looking stern in a suit and tie. His academic accomplishments listed below: PhD from Princeton, numerous published papers, prestigious awards. According to the profile, he'd been a child prodigy himself, completing his undergraduate degree at 19. "Great," Andre muttered, "a prodigy who doesn't recognize another one." He closed the browser and turned instead to the calculus textbook. If Harrington was going to make this class a challenge, Andre would be ready. He had always found comfort in numbers, in the beautiful logic of mathematics where there were clear problems and definitive solutions. Unlike people, math was predictable, fair, and made perfect sense once you understood the rules. By the time Andre left the library for his next class, he'd read 3 chapters ahead in the textbook and worked through most of the practice problems. He felt more confident, more prepared for whatever Professor Harrington might throw at him in the next class. What he didn't know was that his simple act of answering a question correctly had already set in motion events that would transform not only his freshman year, but Professor Harrington's long-held beliefs as well. The battle lines had been drawn, though neither of them fully realized it yet. One thing was certain: Advanced Calculus 301 was about to become far more interesting than any math class had a right to be. 3 weeks into the semester, Andre had settled into a routine at Westfield University. He'd joined David's study group, which met twice a week in the campus coffee shop. The group had grown to include 6 students, all battling through Professor Harrington's increasingly difficult assignments. "I swear he's making this harder than it needs to be," complained Lily, a chemistry major with a pierced eyebrow and perpetually paint-stained hands. She pushed her textbook away in frustration. "I understood calculus just fine last year, but the way he teaches makes everything seem impossible." "That's his whole thing," said Tyler, tapping his pencil against his coffee cup. "My roommate had him last year. Says Harrington believes suffering builds character or something." Andre stayed quiet, focusing on the problem set. He'd noticed something interesting about Harrington's teaching style. While the professor made things unnecessarily complicated during lectures, his assignments actually followed a logical pattern. Once you recognized it, the solutions became clearer. "What about you, Andre?" asked David. "You're the only one who doesn't look like you're about to have a breakdown." Andre glanced up. "It's not so bad if you look at each problem as a puzzle rather than a threat." "Easy for you to say," Lily groaned. "You're the only one who's gotten perfect scores on both assignments so far." That much was true. Andre had turned in flawless work, but instead of earning Harrington's approval, it seemed to have made the professor even more determined to find fault with him. During lectures, Harrington often directed the most difficult questions at Andre, his tone suggesting he was just waiting for the moment Andre would finally get something wrong. "I think he's got it out for you," David had told Andre after yesterday's class. "It's like he's personally offended that you understand the material." Andre had shrugged it off, but privately, he'd begun to wonder the same thing. The next day, Andre arrived early to class as usual. He liked having a few minutes to review his notes before the lecture began. He was surprised to find Professor Harrington already there, writing a complex equation on the whiteboard. "Good morning, Professor," Andre said politely as he took his seat. Harrington glanced at him but didn't respond. He finished writing the equation, stepped back to look at it, then erased a portion and rewrote it. Students began filing in, the volume in the room rising as they chatted about an upcoming campus party and complained about workloads in other classes. Harrington checked his watch and precisely at 10 a.m., cleared his throat loudly. The room fell silent. "Today," Harrington announced, "we're going to deviate slightly from the syllabus to discuss a particularly interesting application of the theorems we've been studying." He gestured to the equation on the board. It wasn't from their textbook, and it was significantly more complex than anything they'd covered so far. Andre studied it with interest, recognizing elements of multivariable calculus combined with what looked like principles from advanced physics. "This," Harrington continued, "is a problem that was presented at last year's International Mathematics Olympiad. Less than 2% of participants were able to solve it correctly." Andre felt a flutter of excitement. He'd followed the Math Olympiad results online, but hadn't seen this particular problem. Rather than simply explaining the solution, Harrington said, his eyes scanning the lecture hall, "I thought it might be educational to see if anyone here can tackle it." His gaze settled directly on Andre. "Mr. Taylor, since you've been finding our regular coursework so elementary, perhaps you'd like to demonstrate your approach to this problem." A few students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Everyone recognized this for what it was, a setup. Harrington was deliberately trying to put Andre in his place by giving him a problem far beyond the scope of their class. Andre felt his heart beating faster as he slowly stood up. He could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on him as he walked to the front. Harrington handed him a marker with a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Take your time," Harrington said in a tone suggesting he expected Andre to fail quickly. "Or feel free to admit it's beyond your current capabilities. There's no shame in recognizing one's limitations." Andre took the marker, trying to keep his hand from trembling, not from fear of the problem. As he studied it more closely, he could see pathways to a solution forming in his mind, but from the unfairness of being singled out this way. He took a deep breath and began working through the equation methodically. The lecture hall was completely silent except for the squeak of the marker against the whiteboard. Andre blocked out everything. Harrington's presence beside him, the watching students, the stakes of the moment, and lost himself in the elegant logic of the mathematics. About 5 minutes in, he heard a small sound from Harrington, something between a cough and a gasp. Andre had taken an unexpected approach, using a theorem they hadn't covered yet but that Andre had studied on his own the previous summer. He continued writing step by step, occasionally erasing and recalculating when he spotted a more efficient path to the solution. After 12 minutes, Andre put down the marker and stepped back. He'd not only solved the problem but had included a small notation at the end, showing how the same approach could be applied to a whole class of similar problems. "That's my solution, Professor," Andre said quietly. "Is it correct?" Harrington stared at the board, his expression a complex mix of emotions: surprise, confusion, and something that might have been grudging respect. He cleared his throat. "Your approach is unorthodox," he said finally. "But the solution appears valid." He turned to the class. "Mr. Taylor has demonstrated one possible approach. However, the standard solution would involve—" "Actually," a voice called from the back of the lecture hall, "that's almost exactly how the gold medalist solved it at the Olympiad." Everyone turned to look at the speaker, a young woman with glasses who rarely spoke in class. Her face reddened at the sudden attention. I followed the competition online," she explained quickly. "The winning approach was praised for its elegance and was very similar to what Andre just showed us." Harrington's jaw tightened. "Thank you for that input, Ms. Chen." He turned back to Andre. "You may sit down, Mr. Taylor." Andre returned to his seat, conscious of the mixture of impressed and astonished looks from his classmates. David gave him a subtle thumbs up. For the remainder of the class, Harrington seemed oddly subdued. He lectured on the scheduled topic but appeared distracted, occasionally glancing at Andre's solution, which he'd left on the board. When class ended, students gathered around Andre as they filed out. "That was incredible," someone said. "How did you know how to solve that?" asked another. "Have you competed in the Olympiad before?" Andre shook his head. "No, but I've studied past problems. They're available online." "Mr. Taylor," Harrington's voice cut through the chatter. "A moment, please." The other students drifted away, leaving Andre alone with the professor. Harrington waited until the room had emptied before speaking. "Where did you learn that approach?" he asked, his tone surprisingly lacking its usual edge. "I taught myself multivariable calculus last year," Andre explained. "I found some MIT lectures online and worked through the problem sets." Harrington regarded him with an unreadable expression. "And what high school did you attend?" "Eastside Public." Something flickered in Harrington's eyes, surprise or perhaps disbelief. Eastside was across town from Westfield, in a neighborhood known more for its economic challenges than its academic achievements. "I see," Harrington said after a pause. "Well, today's demonstration was impressive, but don't think this means the rest of the semester will be any easier. In fact, I expect more from students who show exceptional ability." "I understand, Professor," Andre replied evenly. "Good. You may go." As Andre left the lecture hall, he found David waiting for him in the hallway. "What did the dragon want?" David asked as they walked toward the cafeteria. "I think he was trying to figure out how I knew how to solve that problem." "Man, the look on his face when you finished." David laughed. "I wish I'd taken a picture." I've never seen Harrington speechless before. "I don't think he's done testing me," Andre said thoughtfully. "If anything, I think things just got more complicated." Andre was right. Over the next few classes, Harrington's approach toward him shifted. Instead of trying to catch him in a mistake with basic questions, the professor began posing increasingly sophisticated problems directly to Andre, often on topics well beyond the scope of the course. It was as if Harrington was personally challenging him, pushing to find the limits of Andre's knowledge. What Andre couldn't know was that after their encounter with the Olympiad problem, Harrington had gone to his office and pulled up Andre's application file. He'd read through it with growing confusion. Andre had excellent grades from Eastside, but nothing in his record suggested the kind of mathematical brilliance he'd displayed. There were no advanced placement courses in mathematics at his high school, no mention of formal training beyond standard curriculum, no math competitions on his resume. So where had this ability come from? Harrington found himself both professionally intrigued and personally unsettled by the question. In his 20 years of teaching, he'd encountered a handful of truly gifted students, but they'd all come from prestigious private schools or specialized math programs. Never from a public school in a struggling neighborhood. His worldview, comfortable and unchallenged for decades, had developed a crack. And though he didn't realize it yet, That crack was about to widen considerably. Word spread quickly around campus about what had happened in Professor Harrington's advanced calculus class. By the end of the week, Andre found himself fielding questions from students he'd never even met before. "Is it true you solved a math Olympiad problem that stumped even Harrington?" A guy asked him in the cafeteria line. "Did Harrington really try to get you to drop the class?" Someone else wanted to know in the library. Andre brushed off the questions with a shrug or a short answer. He didn't want to become known as that guy who showed up the calculus professor. He just wanted to learn, to be challenged, to make the most of his scholarship. The scholarship was crucial. Andre's grandmother had raised him after his parents died in a car accident when he was 8. She'd worked 2 jobs to make ends meet, and though she'd never had much education herself, she'd recognized Andre's gift for numbers early on. She'd found free online resources for him, brought home math books from the library sale, and encouraged his endless questions about how things worked. Now, at 72, his grandmother's health was failing. Andre had chosen Westfield partly because of its academic reputation, but mostly because it was close enough to check on her regularly. He'd been offered scholarships to schools farther away, better schools perhaps, but staying near his grandmother wasn't a choice. It was simply what you did for family. On Friday afternoon, Andre visited her after class, bringing groceries and his laundry to do at her small house. "How's school going?" she asked, watching him fold his clothes at her kitchen table. Despite her oxygen tank and the medication bottles lined up on the counter, her mind remained sharp as ever. "Good," Andre said. "Challenging, but good." "That calculus professor still giving you trouble?" Andre smiled. He told her about Harrington after the first week. "He's not making things easy." She adjusted her glasses. "Some people need time to see what's right in front of them. Reminds me of your grandfather. Man couldn't find the butter in the refrigerator if it jumped out and bit him." Andre laughed. "I don't think Professor Harrington is anything like Grandpa." "Maybe not." She patted his hand. "But don't let him dim your light, you hear me? You've got a gift. Don't you dare hide it for anybody's comfort." "Yes, ma'am," Andre said, the familiar phrase a comfortable ritual between them. "Now tell me about the rest of your classes. Any nice girls in that study group of yours?" Andre rolled his eyes but smiled as he updated her on the rest of his college experience. Monday morning brought a new development. As students filed into the lecture hall for advanced calculus, they found a visitor sitting at the back of the room, Dr. Lin, the head of the mathematics department. She was a small woman with short salt and pepper hair and an air of quiet authority. No one knew why she was there, but her presence changed the energy in the room. Even Professor Harrington seemed more formal than usual, his posture stiffer as he began the lecture. "Today we'll be covering applications of parametric equations," he announced, writing on the board with precise measured strokes. "But first I'd like to review last week's assignment." He turned to face the class. "I noticed several common errors that need addressing." The lecture proceeded normally for about 20 minutes. Then Harrington displayed a particularly complex problem from the assignment on the projector screen. "This question gave many of you trouble," he said. "Only 3 students in the class provided the correct solution. Mr. Taylor, would you mind walking us through your approach?" Andre felt a flutter of nervousness at being called on with Dr. Lin present, but he took a deep breath and began explaining his solution methodically. Halfway through, Harrington interrupted. "What made you decide to use this particular substitution?" he asked, pointing to a step in Andre's work. His tone wasn't challenging this time, but genuinely curious. "It simplifies the integration," Andre explained. "If you look at the structure of the equation, there's a pattern that suggests this substitution would reduce the complexity." Harrington nodded. "An astute observation. Continue." When Andre finished, Harrington did something unexpected. He turned to another student. "Mr. Chen, your solution took a different but equally valid approach. Would you share your reasoning?" The class continued this way, with Harrington engaging various students in a thoughtful discussion rather than his usual lecture style. It was as if the presence of Dr. Lin had transformed him into a different teacher altogether, one who valued student input and recognized multiple paths to understanding. After class, as Andre was packing up his notes, Dr. Lin approached him. "Mr. Taylor," she said with a warm smile, "I've heard interesting things about you from Professor Harrington." Andre looked up in surprise. from Professor Harrington. Yes. He mentioned your exceptional performance on the Olympiad problem. I'm impressed. She handed him a business card. I run a special mathematics seminar for advanced students. We meet Wednesday evenings. I think you might find it stimulating. Stop by my office if you're interested. As she walked away, Andre stared at the card in his hand. Harrington had talked about him to the department head, and it hadn't been to complain? What was that about? David asked, appearing at his side. I'm not entirely sure, Andre admitted, showing him the card. Dude, Dr. Lin's advanced seminar is legendary. Only the best math students get invited. Most of them are juniors and seniors. Have you seen Professor Harrington? Andre asked, looking around the emptying lecture hall. He wanted to ask about the recommendation. He left right after class. Had some meeting or something. David nudged his shoulder. You're going to the seminar, right? I don't know. I'd have to rearrange some things. Andre was thinking about Wednesday evening. That was when he usually called his grandmother to check in, and he'd also picked up a tutoring job at the campus learning center to help with expenses. You have to go, David insisted. This could be huge for you, maybe it could. Andre tucked the card into his pocket, his mind already working on how to rearrange his schedule. Wednesday evening found Andre climbing the stairs to the 4th floor of the mathematics building, where Dr. Lin's seminar was held. He'd swapped his tutoring shift and called his grandmother earlier in the day. She'd been thrilled about the invitation. That's my boy, she'd said proudly. You show them what you can do. The seminar room was small, with a large round table in the center surrounded by comfortable chairs. When Andre entered, there were already 6 students seated, along with Dr. Lin. To his shock, Professor Harrington was also there, engaged in conversation with a student Andre didn't recognize. Ah, Mr. Taylor, Dr. Lin said warmly. Welcome. Please have a seat. Andre sat in an empty chair, feeling slightly out of place among the older students. Harrington glanced at him but gave no acknowledgement beyond a brief nod. Now that everyone's here, Dr. Lin began, let's introduce ourselves. This seminar focuses on exploring mathematical concepts beyond the standard curriculum. We discuss recent papers, work on original problems, and sometimes collaborate on research projects. The introductions went around the table. Most of the students were mathematics majors in their junior or senior years. One was a graduate student in physics. Andre was the only freshman. And I'm sure most of you know Professor Harrington, Dr. Lin continued. He'll be joining us this semester as we explore applications of advanced calculus in theoretical physics. The seminar began with a discussion of a recently published paper. Andre listened carefully, absorbing the complex ideas. When Dr. Lin posed a question about one of the mathematical models described in the paper, Andre hesitated to speak up, aware of his status as the youngest person in the room. But as the discussion continued, he saw a connection that others seemed to be missing. Excuse me, he said during a pause, but couldn't we apply the theorem from page 3 to simplify this approach? The room fell silent. Several students looked at their copies of the paper, flipping back to page 3. Interesting suggestion, Dr. Lin said. Professor Harrington, what do you think? All eyes turned to Harrington, who was studying Andre with an inscrutable expression. It's an unusual application, he said slowly, but potentially valid. Mr. Taylor, come demonstrate your thinking at the board. For the second time, Andre found himself at a whiteboard under Harrington's scrutiny, but this time felt different. As he explained his reasoning, Harrington asked probing questions that weren't designed to trip him up, but rather to explore the idea further. That's quite innovative, Harrington said when Andre finished. He turned to the other students. This is exactly the kind of creative thinking this seminar is meant to encourage. The rest of the session built on Andre's insight, with the group working collectively to develop the idea further. By the end, even the graduate student was nodding in appreciation. As they were leaving, Harrington approached Andre. A moment, Mr. Taylor. Andre waited, wondering what was coming. Your contribution tonight was exceptional, Harrington said, his voice low, particularly given your limited formal training. Thank you, sir, Andre replied, unsure where this was going. I've been reviewing your work in my class, Harrington continued. You have a natural intuition for mathematics that can't be taught. He paused. I'm curious, what are your plans after your undergraduate degree? I hadn't thought that far ahead, Andre admitted. Maybe graduate school if I can get funding, Harrington nodded. With your abilities, funding shouldn't be an issue. Have you considered applying for the Summer Mathematics Institute? The application deadline is next month. I wasn't aware of it. I'll send you the information, Harrington said. It would be a good addition to your resume. As Andre walked back to his dorm in the cool evening air, he tried to make sense of what had just happened. Had Professor Harrington just offered to help him? The same professor who had spent the first weeks of the semester trying to prove Andre didn't belong in his class? Something had changed, but Andre wasn't naive enough to think the transformation was complete. He'd seen the slight hesitation in Harrington's eyes, the careful way he measured his words. The professor was reassessing him, but old prejudices didn't disappear overnight. Still, it was a start, an acknowledgement, however reluctant, of Andre's abilities. And for now, that was enough. The weeks following Andre's first seminar with Dr. Lin brought subtle but noticeable changes to Professor Harrington's advanced calculus class. The professor no longer singled out Andre for potential embarrassment. Instead, Harrington began posing increasingly complex questions to him, pushing the boundaries of the course material. It was as if Harrington had accepted Andre's mathematical ability, but was now determined to find its limits. "Mr. Taylor," Harrington called out during a lecture on vector calculus, "how would you apply this concept to a four-dimensional space?" The question went far beyond their textbook, venturing into territory usually reserved for graduate-level courses. Andre felt the familiar flutter of nerves but took a deep breath and worked through the problem methodically at the board. When he finished, Harrington studied his work with narrowed eyes. "Interesting approach," he said finally, "though there's a more elegant solution using tensor calculus. We'll discuss that next semester, for those of you who continue to advanced mathematics." It wasn't exactly praise, but it wasn't dismissal either. From Harrington, it almost counted as encouragement. After class, Tyler caught up with Andre in the hallway. "Dude, you know he's just trying to stump you, right? It's like he can't stand the idea that you might actually know more than he expected." Andre shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe he's actually trying to teach me something." "Yeah, like humility," Tyler scoffed. "The guy's had it out for you since day one," but Andre wasn't so sure anymore. Yes, Harrington remained demanding and sometimes abrupt, but the undercurrent of dismissiveness had faded. In its place was something Andre couldn't quite name, a sort of wary respect, perhaps. Dr. Lin's Wednesday seminar quickly became the highlight of Andre's academic week. Unlike Harrington's classroom with its unspoken tensions, the seminar felt like an oasis where ideas flowed freely. The older students had accepted Andre despite his freshman status, recognizing that his mathematical intuition matched or exceeded their own. During one particularly stimulating discussion about chaos theory, Andre found himself debating a point with Professor Harrington. To his surprise, Harrington seemed to enjoy the back and forth, challenging Andre's assertions with counterexamples that pushed both of them to refine their thinking. "Your argument has merit," Harrington conceded after they'd worked through a particularly thorny mathematical problem together. "I hadn't considered that approach." Dr. Lin smiled, watching the exchange. "This is exactly why these seminars are valuable," she said. "Even those of us who've been teaching for decades can learn new perspectives." After the seminar, as students gathered their things, Dr. Lin approached Andre. "I have a proposition for you," she said. "The department is hosting a presentation for prospective mathematics majors next week. Would you be willing to talk about your experience as a first-year student?" "Me?" Andre was surprised. "Wouldn't an upperclassman be better?" "Actually, we want to show the range of experiences in our program. Your perspective would be valuable." Andre hesitated. Public speaking wasn't his strongest skill, and the idea of standing in front of a room full of strangers made his stomach tighten. But Dr. Lin had been nothing but supportive, and he didn't want to disappoint her. "Okay," he agreed. "I can do that." "Excellent. It's next Thursday at 4 p.m. in the Newton Lecture Hall. Just a 5-minute talk about what drew you to mathematics and your experience so far." On his walk back to the dorm, Andre called his grandmother to tell her about the invitation. A presentation? Her voice sounded weaker than usual, and Andre felt a pang of worry. He needed to visit soon, see for himself how she was doing. "Just a short talk for high school students thinking about studying math," he explained. "Dr. Lin asked me specifically." "That's wonderful, baby. You'll do great. She paused and he could hear her labored breathing. Andre? You remember what I always told you? Yes, Grandma. Don't hide my light. That's right. Your grandfather used to say, what's the use of having a lamp if you're going to keep it under a bushel? You shine bright, you hear me? I hear you, Andre said softly. I'll come visit this weekend, okay? You focus on your studies. I'm fine. But the cough that followed belied her words. I'll see you Saturday, Andre insisted, making a mental note to pick up her prescriptions on the way. The following Tuesday, 2 days before the prospective students' event, Andre arrived at Advanced Calculus to find Professor Harrington distributing papers. Pop quiz, the professor announced to groans from the class. Put away your notes and textbooks. Andre looked at the single sheet of paper placed on his desk. It contained just one problem, far more complex than anything they'd covered in class. He glanced around and saw that other students had different questions on their papers. You have 30 minutes, Harrington said, checking his watch. Begin, Andre studied the problem. It involved a specialized application of differential equations that they hadn't explicitly covered. But the underlying principles were familiar, and after a moment of thought, he began working through it step by step. 20 minutes later, he'd arrived at what he believed was the correct solution. He double-checked his work, made a small correction to one of his steps, and then sat back, wondering if he should use the remaining time to try an alternative approach. As he contemplated this, he noticed Professor Harrington standing nearby watching him. Without a word, the professor picked up Andre's paper and scanned it. His eyebrows rose slightly. Interesting, he murmured almost to himself. Then he handed the paper back and moved on to check other students' progress. When the quiz ended, Harrington collected the papers. Results will be posted by Thursday, he announced as students packed up to leave. Mr. Taylor, he added as Andre was heading out. A moment, please. Andre approached the professor's desk, wondering if there had been something wrong with his solution after all. The problem on your quiz, Harrington said without preamble, was from a PhD qualifying exam at Princeton last year. Andre blinked in surprise. Oh, you solved it correctly in 20 minutes. Harrington's tone was unreadable. It took me considerably longer when I first encountered it. Andre wasn't sure how to respond. I saw the pattern in the differential equation, he said finally. It reminded me of something I'd read in one of the papers from Dr. Lin's seminar. Harrington nodded slowly. I'm curious, Mr. Taylor. Where did you learn to think this way about mathematics? Your high school transcript shows standard courses. Nothing that would explain. He gestured vaguely at Andre's quiz paper. It was the first time Harrington had directly acknowledged the disconnect between Andre's background and his abilities. Andre chose his words carefully. My uncle noticed I liked numbers when I was little. He gave me books, showed me how to find resources online. After he moved away, I just kept teaching myself. Self-taught. Harrington seemed to be turning this over in his mind. With no formal advanced training. Just what I could find on my own, Andre confirmed. The internet has a lot of university-level material if you know where to look. Harrington was quiet for a moment. Then he said, The Summer Mathematics Institute I mentioned. Applications are due next week. Have you looked into it? Yes, sir. I'm working on my application now. Good, it's highly competitive, but... Harrington paused. I'd be willing to write a recommendation letter if that would be helpful. Andre stared at him, stunned. A recommendation from a professor of Harrington's standing would significantly strengthen his application. That would be... Yes, thank you. Harrington nodded once briskly. Have it to me by Friday if you want me to review your application materials before you submit them. Thursday afternoon arrived, and with it, the presentation for prospective mathematics students. Andre arrived at Newton Hall 15 minutes early, his stomach in knots. He'd prepared what he wanted to say, practiced in front of his dorm room mirror, but still felt unprepared. The lecture hall was larger than he'd expected, with rows of seats now filling with high school students and their parents. At the front, Dr. Lin was organizing materials with the help of 2 upperclassmen. Andre, perfect timing, she called when she spotted him. We'll have each student speaker give a brief introduction, then we'll take questions from the audience. Andre nodded, trying to look more confident than he felt. As he took his place with the other student presenters, he was surprised to see Professor Harrington slip into the back of the lecture hall. Their eyes met briefly before Harrington looked away, his expression inscrutable as ever. Dr. Lin began with a warm welcome and an overview of the mathematics program at Westfield. Then she introduced the student speakers, starting with a senior who was heading to graduate school at MIT, followed by a junior involved in research with the physics department. When it was Andre's turn, he walked to the podium, took a deep breath, and began. 6 months ago, I was sitting where you are now, trying to decide where to study. I chose Westfield not because it was the most prestigious school that accepted me, but because it was close to my grandmother, who raised me. He glanced up and saw several audience members nodding in understanding. What I found here is both challenge and opportunity. The classes push me every day, and the professors— His eyes found Harrington at the back of the room. The professors expect excellence, but they also recognize potential, even when it comes from unexpected places. He went on to describe the curriculum, the resources available to students, and the collaborative environment of Dr. Lin's seminar. As he spoke, he felt his nervousness fade, replaced by genuine enthusiasm for the subject he loved. During the question and answer session that followed, a hand went up from a young woman in the third row. "This question is for the freshmen," she said, looking directly at Andre. "I'm from Riverdale High School, and we don't have advanced math classes like some of the private schools. Did you feel prepared when you started here?" Andre recognized the concern behind her question. Riverdale was similar to his own high school, underfunded with limited resources. "Honestly, I was worried about that too," he admitted. "But math is math no matter where you learn it. What matters is your willingness to work hard and ask questions when you don't understand something." He hesitated, then added, "And finding professors who can see your potential, not just your background." From the back of the room, he saw Professor Harrington shift in his seat. After the event, as students and parents mingled with faculty, Andre found himself surrounded by prospective students with questions. He was answering a question about the calculus sequence when he noticed Professor Harrington standing nearby, apparently listening. When the students moved on, Harrington approached. "Nice presentation," he said, his tone neutral but not unfriendly. "Thank you, sir." Harrington seemed about to say something else when Dr. Lin joined them, beaming. "Andre, that was excellent. Several students mentioned how helpful your perspective was." She turned to Harrington. "Don't you think he'd make a wonderful peer mentor for incoming freshmen next year, Richard?" Harrington considered this. Perhaps, if his own academic performance continues at its current level. It wasn't exactly a ringing endorsement, but coming from Harrington, it felt like high praise. Andre suppressed a smile. "I should go," he said. "I have a paper due tomorrow for English composition." As he gathered his things, he overheard Dr. Lin speaking quietly to Harrington. "You know, Richard, I've rarely seen a student with his natural talent. It reminds me of another young mathematician I once knew, one who also had to overcome skepticism about where he belonged." Andre didn't hear Harrington's response, but as he left the lecture hall, he felt a strange sense of optimism. Something was shifting, not just in his relationship with the intimidating calculus professor, but in his own sense of belonging at Westfield. The battle wasn't over. He still felt Harrington's watchful eyes, still sensed the professor's lingering doubts. But for the first time, Andre could envision a future where they might actually work together, rather than against each other. It was progress, one step at a time. As the semester approached its final weeks, the atmosphere in Professor Harrington's advanced calculus class had transformed. The tension that had characterized the early classes had given way to something more productive, a challenging but respectful academic environment where students were pushed to excel rather than fear failure. For Andre, the change was most evident in how Harrington interacted with him. Gone were the attempts to catch him in a mistake or publicly embarrass him. Instead, Harrington had begun treating Andre as something between a student and a colleague, often staying after class to discuss more advanced concepts or recommending additional readings that went beyond the course material. The rest of the class had noticed the shift too. David brought it up as they walked across campus after a particularly engaging lecture. "Remember when we thought Harrington was going to make you drop the class?" he asked with a laugh. "Now he's practically grooming you to be the next math superstar." Andre shook his head. "It's not like that. He's just a good teacher when he stops trying to prove a point." "Maybe," David said skeptically. "But I've had him for 3 months now, And I've never seen him recommend extra reading to anyone else, or spend 20 minutes after class talking about some obscure theorem. Andre couldn't deny that Harrington had been giving him special attention lately. Just yesterday, the professor had left a book on his desk, a rare collection of essays by famous mathematicians about their breakthrough moments. Inside was a post-it note with Harrington's precise handwriting. Thought this might interest you. Page 47 particularly relevant to our discussion. It was a far cry from the cold, dismissive professor who had greeted Andre on the first day of the semester. But despite the improved relationship, Andre sensed that something remained unresolved between them. Harrington had never explicitly acknowledged his initial misjudgment of Andre. Their conversations remained strictly academic, never venturing into personal territory or addressing the elephant in the room. The fact that Harrington had clearly underestimated Andre based on preconceived notions, the situation came to a head unexpectedly during finals week. Andre had been splitting his time between studying for exams and visiting his grandmother, whose health had taken a worrying turn. The doctor had increased her medications, but she still struggled with breathing and had been experiencing more pain than usual. "Don't you worry about me," she insisted during Andre's visit the weekend before finals. "You focus on those exams. Make me proud." "I always do," Andre replied, adjusting her pillows to help her sit more comfortably. "I know that." She patted his hand. "Your grandfather would have been so proud to see what you've become. He always said education was the key that opens all doors." Andre nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. His grandfather had passed away when Andre was 12, but he still remembered the man's passion for learning despite having limited access to education himself. "I wish they could see you now," his grandmother continued, her eyes growing misty. "Both of them. My husband working 2 jobs to put his younger brothers through school, and your mother staying up late to help you with your homework even when she was exhausted from her shift." "I remember," Andre said softly. The weight of their expectations, their sacrifices, felt especially heavy as finals approached. He couldn't let them down, couldn't let his grandmother down. On Monday morning, the day of Professor Harrington's final exam, Andre received a call that sent his carefully structured world into chaos. His grandmother had been taken to the hospital after experiencing severe respiratory distress. The doctor wanted Andre to come right away. The exam was scheduled for 9 a.m. It was already 8:15. Andre stood in his dorm room, phone in hand, torn between his academic responsibilities and his family obligation. There was no real choice to make. Family came first, always had, always would, but he couldn't simply miss the exam without explanation. With shaking hands, he composed an email to Professor Harrington, explaining the situation and asking if there was any possibility of taking the exam later. Then he grabbed his jacket and rushed to catch the bus to the hospital. His grandmother was in the intensive care unit, an oxygen mask covering most of her face. The doctor spoke in hushed tones about pneumonia, complications, and preparing for possibilities. Andre sat by her bedside holding her frail hand, the final exam completely forgotten as the hours ticked by. Around noon, his phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from Professor Harrington. "Mr. Taylor, I've received your message regarding your grandmother's hospitalization. University policy allows for exam rescheduling in cases of documented family emergencies. Please focus on your family matters now. We can discuss rescheduling when things stabilize. R. Harrington." The message was surprisingly understanding without the bureaucratic tone Andre might have expected. He sent a brief thank you and returned his attention to his grandmother. For 2 days, Andre barely left the hospital. His grandmother's condition stabilized but remained serious. He slept in the uncomfortable chair beside her bed, leaving only to get coffee from the cafeteria or make quick trips to the vending machine. On the 3rd morning, as he was dozing in the chair, a noise at the door startled him awake. He blinked in surprise at the figure standing in the doorway. Professor Harrington. The professor looked different outside the classroom setting, less intimidating somehow in a casual sweater instead of his usual button-up shirt and blazer. He held a small potted plant and looked uncharacteristically hesitant. "Mr. Taylor," he said quietly, "I hope I'm not intruding." Andre stood up, still processing the unexpected visit. "Professor Harrington." "What are you doing here?" "Dr. Lin mentioned your grandmother was at Westside Medical. I thought I'd..." He trailed off, gesturing vaguely with the plant. How is she doing? Better today, Andre said, still confused by the professor's presence. The antibiotics are helping with the pneumonia. Harrington nodded, placing the plant on the windowsill. That's good news. An awkward silence fell between them. Andre's grandmother was sleeping peacefully, her breathing steady beneath the oxygen mask. Professor, Andre began, about the exam. Don't worry about that now, Harrington interrupted. We can arrange for you to take it when your grandmother is better. Thank you. Harrington moved to the window, looking out at the hospital parking lot. You know, I've been teaching for over 20 years, he said suddenly. I've seen thousands of students come through my classroom. Andre waited, unsure where this was going. I've always prided myself on being able to identify true mathematical talent, Harrington continued. I thought I could tell within the first few classes which students had real potential and which were simply going through the motions. He turned back to face Andre. I was wrong about you, Mr. Taylor. The admission hung in the air between them. Andre hadn't expected this, not here, not now. When you first walked into my classroom, Harrington said, I made assumptions based on factors that had nothing to do with your mathematical ability. I expected you to struggle, perhaps even to fail. I know, Andre said quietly. Yes, I suppose it was obvious. Harrington sighed. The thing is, Mr. Taylor, I've been forced to reconsider many of my assumptions this semester. Not just about you, but about where mathematical talent can come from, how it develops. He gestured toward the sleeping woman in the hospital bed. Your grandmother, she's the one who raised you? Andre nodded. Since I was 8. My parents died in a car accident. And she encouraged your interest in mathematics? She didn't know much about math herself, Andre explained. But she always found ways to help me learn. Library books, secondhand textbooks, free online courses. Whatever she could get her hands on. Harrington absorbed this, nodding slowly. Remarkable. And you had no formal advanced training before university? No, sir. Just what I could teach myself. Even more remarkable, then. Harrington straightened his shoulders. Mr. Taylor, I owe you an apology. My behavior at the beginning of the semester was unprofessional. I allowed biases to cloud my judgment, and I treated you unfairly as a result. The apology was unexpected and, from what Andre knew of Harrington, probably difficult for the proud professor to make. Andre wasn't sure how to respond. Thank you for saying that, he said finally. It means a lot. Harrington nodded once briskly. Well, I should let you and your grandmother rest. He moved toward the door, then paused. Oh, I almost forgot. I received word yesterday that your application to the Summer Mathematics Institute has been accepted. Full scholarship. Andre's eyes widened. Really, that's amazing. You earned it, Harrington said simply. Your recommendation letter practically wrote itself. As the professor turned to leave, Andre's grandmother stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, taking in the scene. Her grandson standing by her bedside, the unfamiliar man at the door. Who's this? She asked, her voice weak but clear. Andre moved to her side. Grandma, this is Professor Harrington, my calculus teacher. Recognition dawned in her eyes. The one who's been giving you a hard time? Harrington looked startled. Then something like a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. The very same, ma'am. Though I hope I've improved somewhat in recent weeks. She studied him for a moment, then nodded. Good. Everybody deserves a chance to learn and grow, even professors. Harrington bowed his head slightly, acknowledging the gentle rebuke. Indeed, ma'am. Your grandson has taught me quite a bit this semester. He's a special boy, she said proudly. Always has been. Yes, Harrington agreed, meeting Andre's eyes. I believe he is. After the professor left, Andre's grandmother squeezed his hand. So he finally saw what was right in front of him all along. Seems like it, Andre said, still processing what had just happened. She smiled. What did I tell you? Don't hide your light. Yes, ma'am, Andre replied with a small smile of his own. 3 weeks later, with his grandmother back home and recovering well, Andre sat in Professor Harrington's office discussing his upcoming summer at the Mathematics Institute. The relationship between them had evolved into something neither could have imagined at the beginning of the semester, a mentorship based on mutual respect and shared passion for mathematics. I've spoken with the Institute director, Harrington was saying. He's particularly interested in your approach to topological data analysis. It's quite innovative. I've been working on some new ideas, Andre admitted. Still rough, but promising. Harrington nodded. I'd be interested in hearing about them. Perhaps we could continue our discussions next semester? I'm teaching advanced theoretical mathematics, and I think you'd find it challenging. I'd like that, Andre said. As he left the office, Andre reflected on the journey of the past few months. He'd entered Westfield uncertain of his place, faced prejudice and doubt, and emerged stronger for it. Professor Harrington had been forced to confront his own biases and had grown as well. Neither of them was perfect. There would still be moments of misunderstanding, instances where old habits resurfaced. But they had found common ground in their shared love of mathematics, a universal language that, at its best, transcended prejudice and preconception. For Andre, that was enough. It wasn't about changing the world overnight or completely transforming one professor's worldview. It was about staying true to himself, honoring his family's sacrifices, and letting his light shine. One theorem, one proof, one semester at a time.